I know, but I couldn't.
Okay, it's recording now.
Yeah,
Oh,
thank
go
you
ahead,
very
Randy.
much. You probably don't need to introduce me there, John. I'm chairing the overall strategic planning process, and I've been on all of these webinars, and I think the vast majority of the people who are on this evening have heard me introduce things or have interjections or questions. This is a scan of the selected provincial and state regions that are not supplied managed. And the reason we looked at that was we're not going to get supply managed situation in Ontario. Supply managed has done something very different, has resulted in something very different in Quebec. And there's stuff we can learn from Quebec, but what's most germane to us is what happens in other provinces and states that do not have supply management. This was probably actually the earliest PowerPoint completed, but it makes more sense to do it now than it did earlier on. So next slide there, John. So we'll talk what a scan is about this working group, and then what a scan is, and then we'll compare, and then ultimately we'll do something called the skinny, i.e. the things to remember about each of the jurisdictions that have maple in them, sort of like the Coles notes of it. And then there's some conclusions and recommendations. Next slide, John. So some people early on did not necessarily know what a jurisdictional scan was. And yeah, about the working group. Sorry, I was going to the third one by memory here. This particular working group actually was only two of us. And it was myself and Brodie Berrigan. I looked at the other maple jurisdictions in North America, and Brodie looked at a couple of Ontario commodity groups that had some similarities or some lessons we could learn from, which was the Ontario Beekeepers Association and the Ontario Wine Growers Association. And so that's why this work was done. The work was done, though, in the summer of 2021, in advance of any of the work of the other working groups, and even in advance of the grassroots funding proposal being approved. And the reason it was done early, because one, Brodie had time to do his portion in the summer. He's a student, of course, that has presented on the More Trees for the Future webinar and led that group. He had time to do it, and I also wanted to do it so that we would be in a better position to think about what working groups we should form when we finally did get the grassroots proposal. And this helped in the process of that, thinking that through. Next slide there, John. Whoop, we went past one.
Did I? Oh, no, that's.
Okay, must have got cut down then. That's fine, keep going. So this is a slide that's common to all of the strategic, talk about our strategic plan and where this fits in. What you're hearing tonight is a report from one of the 10 working groups. And this is the 9th of the 10 working groups. We will then be entering into the member engagement phase of it, but we've delayed that until September due to several pressures. One was the windstorm. We felt that we should delay. We were just going to have them in early June, and that's when much of the windstorm activity and the after effects of it was happening. And then a number of the participants in phase 2 who were provincial government employees or members of agencies were not allowed to participate in anything leading up to the provincial election and until which the ministers were being announced, and that's now only expected the end of June. And to try to have something July, it just wasn't going to happen. So we've delayed that portion, and it's now officially accepted by the government of Ontario that we will do it in the second and third week of September, and you'll hear more about it. And then, of course, the phase 3, which will take phase 1 and phase 2 into consideration, is actually the strategic plan, which we'll take out for further review with people and comments. Next slide, please. So here we go. A scan. That was the slide I was looking for. So as some people may not know what a scan is, but it is, if you have a particular question or several questions in mind, you either read information or you interview to find the answers to those defined questions. And forget about the unrelated information. You're not trying to collect absolutely everything from somebody you interview or somebody you research. You're trying to find specific things for specific purposes. And the ultimate objective of this working group was identify what is working well in other regions and organizations, so that you may, things that you may want to adopt, and also learning of the things that are not working so well, i.e. there's some lessons of things to avoid as well. So it sort of helps us prepare for our future by seeing what other people have done. Next slide. And so what we've done is look at the various jurisdictions, meaning the ones without supply management, New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, Maine, New Hampshire, Vermont, New York, in regard to their size of their production. We look at what is the number of staff they have, who and what the board is comprised of in those different jurisdictions. We look at the budgets they have, which predominantly made up of membership fees, and we looked at the membership fees and compared them from one to the other, or actually compared them to Ontario. And then we looked at other revenues, sales that they have from other products and other merchandise, and their annual government contributions. Some have none, some have very significant amounts. And then we look at their maple research and extension, and then give the skinny on each of those. So that's what you're going to see in a moment. Some of the work here also helped contribute to the work of other working groups. As we went into maple research and extension, that contributed into our applied research and training working group, and what they concluded. We got some of the early data, and so they were able to dig harder and faster and deeper based upon what we were able to provide them from this early scan. Next, John, please. Now we can see the production bases here. This is based on liters, which we had to translate it back to liters because other places reported in pounds. And we can see that Nova Scotia has a small amount of production. They're undertaking a strategic plan, want to do something to improve that. We'll get to my insights on Nova Scotia. New Hampshire, about 600,000 liters. Maine, about 1.5 million liters. Ontario, New Brunswick, roughly at 2 million liters each. New York is bigger than we are in Ontario, about 3 million. In Vermont, it's got about 7 million. Now, we did this based upon a particular year, and we know that sometimes things go up and go down. Like in 2021, New Brunswick had more than Ontario, but it gives the relative sizing of these organizations at a point in time, and then compares it to the amount of staff they had and the amount of budget at that particular point. So next slide, John. So here we go. We looked at the staff, and I spoke to all of these organizations, sometimes their executive director and some of their executive, sometimes their provincial or state representative, sometimes all of them at the same time. And so our base here is Ontario. We have a half a person. We know that John's putting more than half time in there, but that's what the official is. New Brunswick, which is same size industry as we have 1.5 people. Nova Scotia 0 and Maine 0. And when I get into my Cole's notes version of Maine and Nova Scotia and things, you'll understand how and why they don't have any staff. New Hampshire has no staff as well. When we get to Vermont, they have officially on staff of their association 2.25 persons, and part of that is the regular activities of the association, plus also the new certification program. But what is really important to note is they have access to highly experienced extension staff at University of Vermont at the Proctor Research Center that work hand in glove with their association. So they're almost sort of like staff as well. And we'll look into what that adds up to. So you're starting to see that there's resources to help the organizations in these various different jurisdictions. New York has 1.33 people. Most people think it's only one person, but they actually have a 0.3 person to help. But they just keep going through people over and over again. They haven't sort of landed on who's the person at 0.33. But additionally, they also have extension staff at Cornell University, which of course has 2 research centers and technology transfer centers at Arnott and Uline Maple Research centers. And so who act as well in concert with the association. So they're almost like additional staff above and beyond what the official staff is. Next slide there, John.
Randall, just a quick question. Would it be fair to count part of Jenny into ours?
No, we will in a moment.
Okay.
But it's not the same integration at all.
Okay.
Yeah, Randall.
Yeah.
Randall, a quick one. I was speaking to the Maine group years ago, and I thought they had made movement to a part-time administrative person or executive director in Maine. That didn't happen.
Sometimes things happen and then they unhappen.
Okay.
When we get into each of those, you'll see why things unhappen.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
They had some person, they actually had to let the person go. When I first did the interviews, there was somebody there to talk, because I talked with at 0.25, and then they let that person go soon after I did the interview. And that's why it's 0, because they really didn't have the resources to do it.
Okay, interesting. Thank you.
Yeah. And so from a member's perspective, again, we're comparing Ontario to these other jurisdictions. Ontario has roughly 600 members. New Brunswick has 150 members. Nova Scotia has 50 members. Maine has 180 members. New Hampshire has 350, Vermont about 1,000, and New York about 550. Interestingly, one of the conclusions you're going to see me draw on later is that many of the organizations don't have a really good handle on their numbers, but they have them sort of in magnitudes. And they all realize that they don't represent the whole industry. New Brunswick is really close to it because it is a new industry in the last 15 years, and it has received lots of financial support. So usually getting financial support from governments means you have to provide information and you end up being registered for something or other. And much of New Brunswick, for example, is on Crown land, and thus there's a lot of information that you have to provide to have access to Crown land. Let's look another comparison. Next slide, John. Now here's one of the ones that is really very indicative. Number of board members that are officially available by constitution of each of these organizations. Not to say that the board is all full, but New Hampshire has 8 board members. Nova Scotia has 9 board members. Maine, 11 board members positions. They're not all full. New Brunswick, who has the same size industry as us, have 16 board members. Vermont, who has an industry about 3.5 times the size of us, have 17 board members. And New York is structured, has some commonalities the way we're structured. They have 16 board members in their state organization and about 24 board members in regional organizations. Now look at Ontario. We have 24 board members. Plus we have, which is, one for each, two for each region, plus there's 2 exempt board members, fill positions, past president and president. And then we have alternates, another 11 people. And then out and amongst all our locals, we have, I'm guesstimating 66. And the reason I'm guesstimating is because we really don't have solid information about how many board members we really truly have in some areas. And I'm not making a complaint about that. I'm just saying our information is good in some places and weak in other places. But my overall message here, we've got massive amounts of governance, massive amounts of people filling position on boards, compared to other regions that have much more production. To give you an idea, the board in Quebec is only 13 members and their industry is 30 times larger than us. Just as a comparison, it's also something we need to look at from an effectiveness perspective, but I'm not going to delve into that tonight because that's what next week's presentation is about. Can we have the next slide there, John, please? So took the budgets of various organizations and said, okay, what can these organizations depend upon, which is basically membership fees and the core things they have responsibilities for from annually, year to year to get monies. And we, not the one-off grants. So if all of a sudden, you apply for a grant of 15,000, it's a one-off one. And that's not included in these numbers, just so we can keep it consistent. And the ones that are doing really good jobs tend to spend more time in getting grants. And for example, New Brunswick has a good base, but they also get lots of grants on top of that. So part of the reason why they don't have staff in some places is their core budgets. In Nova Scotia, 10 grand, Maine, 12 grand, New Hampshire, 13.6. There's a story behind the New Hampshire one. It used to be better. Ontario, roughly 72. Vermont, about 75. New Brunswick, 130. They have extremely high membership fees. That's why the 130, but we'll get into that in a moment. And every year, without even turning light switch on, New York State gets $225,000 from their state. And then the balance is their membership fees. So, basically get your members and the government gives you a bunch of money and Bob's your uncle, you get off and rolling. And, does that make them more effective? Well, it actually, we'll talk about that in a moment. When we get into each of the regions a little more closely. John? So here's the membership fees. I don't know what happened to pagination. They were all lined up at one point. Ontario has membership fee in different categories. $40 or less than 100, $85 for 100 to 250 taps, and 115 for greater than 250 taps. New Brunswick is based on a per hectare basis. How many hectares do you have under your control in your maple operation? Their average membership fee for their 150 members is $625. Now, somebody with 100 hectares will be paying, 7 times 0.5, and that will give you what they would pay annually. But a number of them have quite a few hundred hectares, so they're paying significantly more. But it averages out if you take their budgets and their number of hectares to about $625 membership per year. Nova Scotia has a $40 flat rate, and then plus $0.01, so it's 1 cent per tap, and that gives you what the base revenue from members are in there. And then Maine has $65 as their base. And if you want a little additional advertising, you pay another $15 to be listed on the website and get a few extra things. New Hampshire is a flat fee of $40. And Vermont is a graduated fee basis from $40 to up to $300, depending upon the number of taps. And we'll break that out a bit later when we look at the specific focus on each of those states. On average, for some reason, they've chosen $69 as their fee in New York, and $10 for a student. And if you're retired, you pay $25 here. And I made a note here is that even though New York has membership fees to their members, it only represents 12% of the New York budget. So the balance of what they work from in New York State, the other 88% comes from government. So just putting that out there for us to remember that. Let's go next slide there, John. So annual guaranteed government contributions. And you remember there's the flat rate of fees, and then there's, if there's anything guaranteed annually, you can add that in. So New Brunswick has their fees, which is about $650 per member. And then they get monies from the government of New Brunswick to run a silviculture program and to run the Advance Payment for Crops Act. And so that's where you can keep your maple, your syrup, and sell it over a period of time. It's sort of, they give you a payment ahead, and then you wait for the rest. Previously, that was just, they had an outright grant. And then as time has moved on, 15 years, they got for about 15 producers to 150, is that the government less laid out money, but instead said, here's a program, run it, and you keep administrative fees for it, etc. So that is an annual guaranteed contribution. There's no annual guaranteed government contribution in Nova Scotia, Maine, New Hampshire, or Vermont. But in New York, I think I alluded to this before, bing bang, it's a new year, here's $225K from the government of New York State for education, marketing, and promotion, which goes directly to their association. I was told how that came about. They had a very well-placed politician that really liked the maple industry quite a while ago. And it's not an annual, it's not, you have to apply for the grant. It's a statutory payment. It's listed in the budget. Thou shall pay the New York State maple syrup producers $225K. Or anyway, there was a formula for it, but it's currently $225K. Next slide. Other revenues, we do have some other revenues ourselves. For example, jugs and store merchandise. We know that's been decreasing, and do we actually make a net on the store merchandise? If we do, it's not a whole lot, and jugs have been decreasing. So yeah, the other revenues is helps, but it's not major things. And then New Brunswick had jugs and store merchandise. Nova Scotia has no staff and very limited organization, don't have the volume or the bandwidth to run anything else. In Maine, they do jugs and store merchandise. In some of the other states, they have the opportunity to buy syrup at bulk prices and then sell it at the state fair for retail prices and keep the rest of it. But in Maine, for some reason, one producer got that right, and they sell syrup at the state fair, and it all goes to that one producer. It doesn't go to the association. Whereas in New Hampshire, they can sell at the state fair and get the net difference between the bulk price that they paid for it and the retail price. But the problem in New Hampshire is their volunteerism has gone down to the point where they could not find somebody to man or woman or person, let's call it, the state fair to sell that and look after it. And so it's gone to abeyance. There, New Hampshire has gone down in revenue, and it also relates a little bit to it. Ray was asking about how they maybe had somebody. Well, they have less money because their volunteerism has gone down. Vermont, jugs, merchandise, state fair sales as a fundraiser. New York has revenues from some royalty stream from some research they funded at Cornell University, maple teas and maple coffees. They get a bit of royalty stream of $15K, and their state fair syrup sales, they net $40K there. So it's nothing to scoff at, the ability to sell maple syrup at their state fair and make money, the difference between the retail and the bulk price. But in New Hampshire, they don't have volunteers to do it. So I'm just putting that out there, as it wasn't small potatoes when they didn't volunteer.
Randall, the New York one, I've sat in on presentations at the New York, and I've seen the booth. I've been at the exhibition there, not at fair time, but otherwise, this seems to be lowball to me. And from what I heard in regards, so it's the 40 from the state fair, their profit,
That's their profit. That's their net. So if you have the number of what they sold it for, it'd be much higher, but it's net between the bulk and the retail.
Okay, and that goes to the association because they have to pay the producer the syrup. Yeah,
straight to the association.
Yeah, it seems a bit low, but anyway, whatever it is.
It could be, but you can only get the information that the executive director wants to tell you.
Fair ball.
And everybody was in the same boat. They all were as forthcoming or not forthcoming. She also indicated it's been decreasing over time, but that was their most current net.
Wow. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Next one, John. Okay, publicly funded maple research and extension. And the word extension here means training. We used to have OMSPA in all these locations, these counties, and there's always an extension officer there that helped agriculture, etc. And so from a maple research and extension perspective, Ontario, for all intents and purposes, no focused research. And that was also shown in our applied research and training center working group. We have 60% of a full-time person in the name of Jenny, with limited but increasing experience in the maple industry. To contrast Jenny to somebody like Mark Canella, Mark Iselhart, etc., there's no comparison in expertise. Let's put it that way. I mean, those people are world class. Jenny's a good person. Jenny's learning. Jenny's keen. But this is what we have in Ontario: no research and 0.6 of a person to help us with things. But with she's close to us, but she's not as sort of hands-on. Working at the level that, let's say, Vermont does. I mean, actually, the Vermont Extension people sits on the board of Vermont maple syrup producers, sugar producers, sorry. Nova Scotia has no extension and no research, but are speaking to Cornell about whether it'd be possible, if they can raise some money from their government, to get Cornell to help them to improve their production. The average production in Nova Scotia is less than half a liter per tap. There's a number of reasons for that, but we'll get into that when we look at Nova Scotia. Maine has a comparatively small amount of publicly funded maple research and extension when compared with New York and Vermont, but it's still more than ours. New Hampshire, again, a comparably small amount when it's compared to New York and Vermont. Vermont has very significant amounts of high experienced research and extension support from UVM and Proctor. And as I say, their people work as if they were almost on the association. And the same type of thing could be said about New York. So you look at budgets, you look at person years, experience, this type of thing. And you compare to Ontario, we're better off than Nova Scotia and some other stuff, but we sure are nowhere close to what Vermont and New York are, which we're actually closer to in a sense of what the industry is about, but not in regard to funded research and extension. John, next slide. The skinny on New Brunswick. Now, I had a whole slew of notes, pages of notes, but this is the skinny, meaning give me the short Coles Notes versions of it. New Brunswick is built on public lands and government capital grants for both and as well as operating capital support for the producers as well as for running their association. Their association gets kickstarted by a bunch of money that went into it. There was a highly placed person. There was a first executive director who was, I might get this wrong, but clerk of their council in the New Brunswick government went on to that position, and a bunch of money kept following, coming his way. They went from, in 15 years, 15 producers to 150 producers, and now basically outproducing Ontario, depends on the year, but they're now lobbying for access to another 14,000 hectares. And you know that if they do that, there will be more people coming in to do stuff, and their production is going to go up. Leases are based on hectare basis, and it's the highest membership by far of any of the association. And also, if you look at New Brunswick producers, they're about, on average, 20 times larger scale of operation than our average member within Ontario. Again, a much newer industry that has a lot of capital grants and operating support pumped into not only the producers, but also into their association. They're again on the verge of doubling their production. They talk about striking for more crown land to be released for tapping. Of course, they're going to be fighting that with the lumber industry, but nonetheless, they have a decent economic case to be made. Next one, John. I think it actually more than one skinny. How I would call New Brunswick is an arm of Quebec. Largest producers are from Quebec. In Quebec, if you want to expand, you have to get more. You buy somebody else out that has a quota per se, and then that's how you get larger. Well, in the case of New Brunswick, they come in from Quebec, headquartered, and get access to crown land, and then make their syrup, and then take it back into Quebec to sell to the bottlers. And so they often have quite a good size operation in Quebec and a good size operation in New Brunswick. There's something to be learned about there, and just flag that one too. Lessons for Ontario. If you learn from New Brunswick, closer engagement with our government based upon an economic development strategy. And we also, lessons we learned from New Brunswick is plan for potential Quebec incursion into Ontario. That's sort of the watch out for what may happen and what one needs to do if they're going to get government support the way New Brunswick has. Next skinny, please. Next skinny is Nova Scotia, no staff to very low annual budget. They're currently after the government to hire staff for them. Even though they have a small board, they can't fill it. Their volunteerism is way off. They have a low rental rate for the crown land. One of the reasons it's really low is that the land is not that productive, and there is not that much cert produced per tree. I'm also going to make you a prediction is that where they have land with maple on it, it may well be hit by climate change earlier and faster than we are, just because of where they're located. The provincial average is half a liter or less, and a good producer rarely exceeds 1 liter per tap. Well, they do have one big problem, is that the largest producer, who represents 20% of the provincial production, does not want to belong to the association. To me, there's no real particular lessons for Ontario to learn here. Again, we say, you know, what are the things we may want to copy because it's working really well, and what are the things we want to avoid? I think there's better lessons on what to avoid in other jurisdictions. That's the skinny of Nova Scotia. Even though they've done a strategic plan and get money to do it, they're in a whole different stage of existence in Nova Scotia. So there we are. Maine, no staff because of the low annual budget. They're not able to fill their executive positions on their board. One of the 5 executive positions remains open. Of the 4 that are filled, of the 4 of the 5 that are filled, 3 people are from the same family, mom, dad, and daughter. And you know, just put a little star there too. Things are too closely held. That's not a good thing. You also notice that, yeah, so it's a concern, and the balance of the board remains unfilled at all. So they have no board members except for 4 of the 5 executive positions, and 3 of those are in one the same family. There's significant Quebec producer presence in the northern part of the state on leased land. And those folks, those 34 headquartered Quebec companies who are located in Maine, do not participate in the association. It's not of much concern to them. They have operations on either side of the border, and they basically say we have a second location, and that's where we get served. We don't really care much what happens in the association. Here's one of the lessons. There's got to be issues related to the closely held board and the lack of volunteerism. And the other one is watch out. There may well Quebec be coming looking at us. And with the plans that Quebec has, they can't do it internally. They're going to be looking for external locations to make their SERP. Let's see what we have for the next skinny. New Hampshire, no staff, low annual budget, not able to fill their board, even though they have a small board, increasing Quebec presence in the northern part of the state, declining volunteerism. They have the opportunity to sell SERP at the state fair to raise money, but they don't have anybody wanting to volunteer for it. And I guess pay attention to volunteerism. Some of these have got to such a low critical mass of activity. Maine and New Hampshire is that you wonder if they can recover, but that's just sort of one of my asides. So thanks. Next skinny is in Vermont. I would suggest that if you have never been on the Vermont website and look at their board, is I consider them to have an outstanding board from an age and gender mix perspective. I consider their board to be really good size. It consists of producer, industry, and academia and government. And go on there and you see younger folks, educated folks, very entrepreneurial folks. There's something to be said for just even looking at their board and saying, wouldn't it be nice if we had something like that? They have outstanding research program at UVM Proctor. And then here's the size membership rates, because previously I said that it was anywhere from $30 to $300 per member. And I decided to break it out a bit more here. So if anybody starts talking about, oh, Vermont is XYZ members, and it's no such thing as one general membership fee, in case we ever wanted ourselves to talk about graduated membership fee per size. Here's comparison. That's all that was there for. What's the next one there, John? I think it's probably more skinny on Vermont. Yes. On Vermont, they're focusing on quality product and food safety as their product differentiation. And we've seen some other data more recently on studies that were done on Vermont, and it's the perceived valued by consumers of Vermont syrup over any other type. And the you know, they prefer to buy it, and they're prepared to pay, I think it was 15% more. And so they have an active program in differentiating their product from any other type of syrup in that made in the States, and probably and by through that saying that comes from Canada. This helped get some of the thinking going in the product differentiation and market development working group to look closely at what Vermont was doing. Whereas there hadn't been a lot of Quebec incursion into Vermont, it has begun. Quebec Interest bought the Guild. The Guild was a 500,000 tap operation that went from the land to finished products, and I don't mean just syrup, but all sorts of other finished products that would then be sold. And I don't know, it was less than 5 years that it was owned as the Guild. And then Quebec Interest had purchased it. I would think a lessons for Ontario is to look really closely at Vermont and emulate what they're doing from a research, extension, and food safety perspective. And then what are their thoughts about Quebec incursion into their state, and whether there's some lessons for us to learn here too. And I think some of that showed up in the more trees, access to more trees for the future into that working group that reported last week. Let's look at the skinny on New York. They have the largest accessible maple tree resource in the United States, larger than Vermont. But according to their executive director of their association, they're underperforming on this opportunity. We often use that same thing. We have the largest accessible maple tree resource in Canada, bigger than Quebec, but we're not performing to Quebec's level. It almost seems like the same message that they're using in New York. Oh man, this annual statutory grant from the state for $225K. John, wouldn't you like a check like that to arrive in the account? Lovely. Anyway, they have outstanding research extension programs at Cornell and at their research stations. They are really concerned about their industry aging out and succession planning, as in the lack of succession planning. We started to hear that as well. So some sense I'm hearing like New York and Ontario have some of the same concerns at the present time. And I was speaking to their executive director, Helen, and she was saying, oh my gosh, sounds a lot like us. And so there's probably something we could work on together on some issues of aging out and succession planning and whatever else. They are also focusing on quality product and food safety and differentiation based upon something called New York Grown and New York Certified. And there's a link there for anybody who wants to delve into that more. But I also would refer you to the quality assurance and food safety working group, because they delved into it more, and you'd get more detail than that. As I say, this was done in summer 2021 to get prepared for us to establish the working groups. And so basically this helped point people to various directions to go find stuff. John, next slide, please. One of the things we've talked about is like, oh, can you get access to Crown land in the state? In this case, in the US, it'll be state land. And we thought about, what about Ontario's Crown land? Can we get access to it? Quebec has access to their Crown land. But one of the things that I learned from New York was technically they have ability to put maple syrup operations on Crown land. And I guess there's a bit of stuff that's been grandfathered. But in many of the better areas in Crown land that could be maple production, the lease terms are too short. And they're 5 years. And like, there's no way you're going to make an investment with 5 years only. And part of that was, yeah, sure, you can have access to it, thumbs up. Oh, thumbs down, but it's only 5 years. And so it was, you can have it, but you can't really technically use it. And so there was from that a lesson to learn about making sure that the terms and the lease terms, if one gets to go that direction, are appropriate for the business. They don't have much encouragement from Quebec. Where they share a border with Quebec is there's large open agriculture areas and not much maple syrup activity on either side of the border. So it's not like, oh, I can go down across the border an hour and a half, and I'm at my next location. It doesn't really happen that way in Vermont. And if you go in further into Vermont where you start finding maple trees, you run into the Adirondack Park, where new tapping is not allowed. You know, existing tapping was because, you know, when they did the Adirondack Park, they took over some existing settled land and make you know, made the park, and it had special arrangements in place. They also have a large governance structure, which they find is problematic. Their governance structure is similar to our governance structure. They have a bigger industry, but they don't have as many people in their governance structure as we do, and yet they think theirs is too large. Lessons for Ontario. Government should support research and extension, food safety, marketing and promotion, consumer education. I would say lobby, lobby, lobby. The New York people know how to lobby like crazy. And when they went to put a new camp in one of the research stations, it was just government handed over the 500 grand to build the new camp and demonstration, because the old one was getting long in the tooth. And so they seem to have a relationship with the government, which is closer than some. Just as, well, if you want something, you're going to have to ask for it to make a good case. And they seem to have done a good job of that. Next slide there, John. I think we're off the skinnies. Conclusion, informed by the best practices. To me, OMSPA is understaffed based upon what others have as staff resources. We should likely be 1.5 person years. That's just my thought process on it, versus the 0.5. John works much more than 0.5, and he knows we still don't have enough. And our governance structure is bloated, and it's antiquated. It's established in 1960s, based upon counties and whatever, and a lot of help, I think, probably at the time establishing it by OMSPA or its predecessor, and where, you know, they had ag reps in every county based upon that's the way they did it. We need to look at how we structure ourselves, but I'll get into that next week. I also learned that all jurisdictions have inadequate data on the maple product sector. You talk to the executive director, oh, we had this study, and well, that was done 5 years ago. Oh, I really don't know how to answer that question. You know, I think that, and by the way, you know, and they don't really have really good data. And it's not they were trying to avoid telling me things. They basically don't have good data. And so one of the reasons we established the data working group was, if we can get better data, maybe we can compete against some of these places based upon having better data. We in the Ontario industry are very underserved from a research and training perspective. What of course came out of that was we showed that much more in our working group, and found that Ontario government officials agreed with that, and then suggested a way in which we could address that. And so if you want to see the thoughts process there, go to that particular working group. And we're very underserved from an extension perspective, which is why we applied research and applied research and training is why we have a proposition there from one of the working groups. Next slide there, John. We're getting close to the end of this one. Oh yeah, here we go. The Ontario government does not invest in the maple product sector to the extent that Many of the other jurisdictions don't, that others do. New Brunswick and New York come to my mind. Vermont does as well from the extension perspective, but these other places put it directly into the trade association, i.e. the equivalent of OMSPA in their locations. And so we need to address that. Now, the other one too, because we have talked in the past, oh, we need more members, we need more members. Well, that's what's going to really make us more economically feasible. But association budgets are not significantly growing by increasing membership and members' fees. So you get some more members, you ask a bit more money from each, you probably lose some. You end up getting a bit, but not much as it compares to revenue from other sources, which often means government. So, grow the membership, yeah, do that, but that's not the panacea that changes everything. The jurisdiction with the most current overall structural similarities and challenges to Ontario is New York, except they also get a check. I think the aspirational government structure for Ontario is Vermont. And jokingly, I've said we need to be the Vermont of Canada, but we'll leave that one for another day as to what that may mean. Last slide there, John. There we are. The jurisdictional scan, we welcome all comments, inputs. Realize this was done in 2021 ahead of the other working group. You can see where some of the seeds were planted for some of the working group. I could take questions now, but John, can you switch over to the other one? Because we also did, this is what Brody focused on. We also did a very good look at on other agricultural associations within the province of Ontario to see, again, what's working well for them and what is not working well, i.e. lessons that we can learn. So you got that slide presentation, John? It's just not up. There we go. This is not a long slide presentation. This is the one that Brody worked on. We looked at 2 organizations that we thought we could learn from, and it also gives us a comparison of size of their industry, amount of staff support, amount of research support, etc. So, because if we're going to say to province of Ontario, oh, look what other places are doing, they say, oh, that's other places. We can also say, yes, but in Ontario, there's these organizations that are things that have got your support. And if we are making the case for support around research, support around various other things, we at least have Ontario examples for that. John, let's move through this. I think it's only about 8 or 9 slides. We looked at our first case study was the Ontario Beekeepers Association. Their mission statement is there. They advocate on behalf of beekeepers' interests and support research and deliver practical training and information to their members. They've been established for quite a period of time, established in 1881, and it's the longest running agricultural organization in Ontario. They represent approximately 50% of beekeepers in Ontario, and they're the only province-wide beekeeper organization. It's a voluntary-based organization through although the Ontario Bee Act requires everyone who owns or is in the possession of honeybees to register with the apiary inspection program. So they know where the beekeepers are and who they are in Ontario. And so unlike Ontario, like maple industry, we don't know all the productive producers out there. We just know who is our members. Ontario beekeeping sector has 16% of the colonies in Canada. Alberta has the most. The majority of colonies in Ontario are run by commercial operators, which is defined in the honey industry as 50+ colonies. Below that are referred to as hobby beekeepers. Ontario has the most beekeepers, not the most bees, but the most beekeepers of any of the Canadian provinces. And there's the other stat about Alberta, how much it produces, and Ontario, how much it produces. So next slide, John. remember we have 0.5 person years. The Ontario Beekeepers Association has 7 full-time employees. 7. Now, there's a reason that happens. The 2 employees who run the membership office, including a general manager, and 5 employees who run the tech transfer program, the research office, which is the training and research and all those other things. We don't have that. Yes, an organization in Ontario does. Now, that's to say that this can't happen in Ontario for the maple industry. It already happened for the honey industry. Next slide, John. Now, here's interesting too, is the bylaw specifies that a minimum of 9 of the 14 directors shall be commercial beekeepers. And then they appoint a youth representative and an industry representative, and the board terms are from 1 to 3 years. So right now, just to take that into perspective, here's a different governance model that we may want to look at, if it makes sense. How do you balance regional interest? How do you balance scale issues? They've taken this particular approach, and here's who happened to be on their board as of 2021. Remember, we did this in summer of 2021. Next slide, John, please. And so here's how they're structured, the way that they have their folks working on things. The 7 people. Interesting that you can see where the research stuff comes in big time. Through the OBA strategic review process, the board of directors developed a more streamlined and focused board committee structure in terms of reference for each of the components. They are also now going into a strategic planning process. Maybe they started it, they contacted us about what we were doing, is that they even want to more refine how they structure themselves. So they're not burdened down in committees any more than they need to be. They have a new is executive director, so that's sometimes what happens. You get a new board, you get a new executive director, there's another look-see at things. So the current executive director hasn't been there that long. I'm going to say a year and a half, maybe at the most. Now a year and 3 months. So that's how they structured themselves. Next slide, John. Membership review, membership and revenue, sorry. Their membership dues account for 19%, grants 17%, tech transfer 7%. They have a group liability insurance program, which they raise money off of as well by offering it. And then they have a going forward 2 grants. Now, that was in 2020. When we looked at 2021 and asked them the question, the revenue is $725,000. Our annual revenue is, much less than that. And you'll see that our associations are roughly the same size. Now, we understand, though, that when 2021 had finished, the budget has shrunk somewhat, but nowhere close to what ours was. It still was north of $500,000, I think, because one of the grants had finished and they probably were in the process of writing for more grants, which they say is one of their strengths, is applying for grants to support their activities. It has borne fruit, i.e. if you relied upon membership, you would have only got to roughly 20% of that 725,000, like 100, whatever, 140 would be. And so they're really good at other revenue generation. Next slide, John. So the membership office, those 2 people are funded by fees, but the research is basically funded by grants. And there's a quote from Melanie Kempers. They really invest in capable writing of grants. And New Brunswick does the same thing. And so they were historically funded by OMSPA some time ago. They are now funded by grants more so. It's a difference between direct contributions and going through a competitive process. What we can also learn is that in the past, they have said, look, you're not doing a lot of good research for us in the bee industry. Why don't we take that over and you compensate us for the research, i.e. live up to your research and extension responsibility. So the beekeepers took that over. And it's been indicated to us by one of the people that worked on the cost of production study and the data working group, is that they know the process that the Ontario beekeepers went through, and we could probably follow the same process. Again, that was the chief economist from OMSPA, convinced the government they're not doing enough for us in research and extension, and we could possibly manage the same type of deal as the Ontario Beekeepers Association. So there we are. They've accessed a bunch of different grants, and even the one that we did, Grassroots Growth Initiative, but they accessed a whole lot more type of things as well. Many other type of things. So next slide there, John. So their membership, you'll see about 1,484 members. 135 are commercial scale. They have a category that are less than 50 colonies, 791. They have young folks that they've created a category for. And then they were talking about new members who just come in and the number of industry members. So it gives a perspective of who belongs to their organization in which categories. And so you can see that it also varies from $40 per year for young members to $250 for industry members. So it gives us a bit of a scale if we want to think about membership fees. But what I said earlier, you can increase your members, increase the fees, but it is a small amount in comparison to, let's call it grant writing and obtaining outside funding resources. Next slide, John. So their key success factors was focusing on new entrants, concrete member benefits such as the insurance program and the tech transfer program. They believe a strong internal governance and internal capacity with their full-time people. And they really have some very good governance documents, so they know how to run their organization and what's per hoil and what's not, what's acceptable, what's not, how to do things. So it's not just opinions. And they have an extremely good capacity for obtaining funding, and one staff person who really works significantly at that and has criteria for it. Let's go down to the next slide. So Ontario, our industries are roughly the same size. And what I'm going to say is that we're probably larger than honey, but they have to report their income because they have to register for the Beekeepers Act in Ontario, the one I referred to earlier. And we sell so much stuff onto the table and for cash that it never really shows up. So it makes the bee industry look larger than us, but in actuality, we're larger than the bee industry, our real industry size. And yet the beekeepers have so many more human resources and research resources, extension, training resources than we do. So basically to say, if we follow some of the same strategies, we may have the resources that we need. And
and they've got a deck full of jokers that can trump anything on pollinators. That's one of the key drivers, right? And I've talked to these guys for years. And so,
yeah, it is. It is. We just have to find a different thing than
absolutely
than bees. Just saying, Frank, is that they had their story, they had their strategy, they have their outcomes. We got to find our story, our strategy, our outcomes, and that's what the working groups went to investigate.
I'm with you.
And that's why they did it.
That's carbon sequestration.
Yeah, that is probably the one that we will work on as our door opener. But the thing is that the Ontario government can't just say, oh, well, you know, they got lots of money in New Brunswick, you know, or New York, and we can't do it that way. And we go say, well, wait a second, it has happened in Ontario. Let's look at the next one there, John.
And we have bee habitat too.
That's right.
Correct. No,
And
correct.
we have a number of people that do both, okay? So they'll be great to talk with. We look at the wine industry. Now, this is one that has, I think the biggest thing to learn is that when something's successful, all sorts of little splinter group happens. And so we did look at the wine growers of Ontario. And this is what they say they are. It's the voice of the Ontario wine industry, and provide information and services to their members and to other stakeholders. Next slide, there's only a few more. So what happens is that when everything gets going really well, oh, well, you know, you're not representing us as well, our craft wineries. So they established a craft winery group, and then there's the wine growers, which was the original one. And then, not that VQA is an association, but there's a whole nother entity here that defines the quality and administrates the labeling standards and making sure people meet the quality. It's another organization, but like if you hear a bunch of names of things, you're like, oh my gosh, a whole bunch of names out there, but they do have different functions. And they have a separate entity for marketing of wines and events that promote wines. And then there's the other one, which is there's wines, but prior to wine, there's grapes, and they're connected. And the thing is that it seems complicated, and they've said maybe it's over divided, but they got to an extent where their industry got successful enough that they were able to support more focused activities. So it's possible, you know, a consideration is that we hive off all the marketing and promotion that maple industry does and put it in the third party. We could hive off the research and training and put it in the third party. But I don't think we need to go there, particularly at our stage. It's if we get to a point where something takes on a life of its own, we have different choices on different activities. That's all I would take from that, but their ecosystem of things gets a little confusing, but this is another example, which is a bit more extreme than the Ontario Beekeepers Association. Next slide, John, there's only a few more. They have 2 full-time employees, president and the executive directors, and they have a board of directors comprised of 12 members, that's all. And the executive is elected for 3 to 5 year terms. And the representation on the board is from all sizes of wineries, as well as 4 who are grape growers, commercial grape growers, who aren't into the wine making. Some people are grape growing and wine making. Some people are just grape growers, where the grapes end up in wine. So they divvied and chopped that board up in a sense of making sure that everybody's representative. They have what I call they're trying to establish, deliver, and restrictive board participation to maintain that cohesiveness, i.e., they don't want to have any government representation on it. You know, that's at their call. You know, in Vermont, we saw that one of their board members, Mark Iselhart, is University of Vermont / government representative, but in the and this wine organization, they didn't want that to happen. Let's next slide. Full members, associate members, there's the various costs, and they're not governed by provincial legislation, so there's no public disclosure financial statements, i.e. We couldn't get details out of them about what size their budgets were annually, because they don't have to provide it, and if they weren't going to do it for anybody, they weren't going to do it for us. But it gives you an idea. Last slide, I think it is. We're pretty close to the last slide. Now, here's their research, the cool climate on Ecology and Viticulture Institute, which is Brock University. Let's move on. They have a certification program for sustainable winemaking certificate. Again, some of this helped form some of our thinking. Move on there, John. There is observations. The Vita Industry Association, because they have so many different subgroups of it, it can be detrimental. Good partnerships on research. They have good hired leadership and a board structure which is cohesive, and they are one of the current issues is environmental sustainability versus organic. They're having to deal with that. So we asked them, what are some of your more major issues at the moment? And that's one of the ones that we may face at some point, was environmentally managing our bush. Is that the same as organic or not, or et cetera, et cetera. So we may need to address that at some point, but they just have to mention that. Next slide there, John. Strong and cohesive governance is what they would say is key success. Focus on succession planning and new entrants is important for the future of the industry. And work closely with post-secondary educations, which is a way to help in succession and in improving the performance of the industry. And they iterated internal capacity, i.e. enough staff to do the job. And part of the job is securing new funding from other third-party sources. Gonna be close to the finish here.
I think that's it.
That's it? Okay, good.
Yeah.
Thank you. Now, I did a bit of information on Quebec, which we can share, but it was not a PowerPoint presentation per se, because the PowerPoint was based upon, oh, there's the scan right at the very top. Just show it, not that I'm going to go through it, but we had sent a questionnaire to Quebec. Jules Rochon did that. We sent it in English and they responded in French. So you could go through it. I've done the skinny for Quebec, which is, 30 times larger than us. 13 board members, there's one provincial president and one president from each of the 12 chapters. All I can keep saying is, wow, we have a really bloated governance system in regard to our size of industry. They have 70 employees versus our 0.5 employees. Well, they're 30 times larger, but still, that being said. And this is how they fund themselves. They have their own research center, CIR Quebec, and the provincial government considers them to be an economic development strategy. Ontario really hasn't considered us as an economic development strategy. I'm not sure we've actually promoted ourselves as an economic development strategy for rural economic development. They play that card really well. And just roll down a bit more. Yeah, so that's talks about their inspection and whatever else. The balance of the document is a questionnaire where the English question is asked and the French answer is given. But you'll see that if you know that you can read the English question, you can very much easily interpret what the answer is. And they also gave, just keep rolling there, John. And they also gave a lot of really good links. And just keep rolling because I'm not going to stop at anything. To their marketing materials, to how they evaluate quality and all sorts of things. And so it's worthwhile, just even if you took a short view through it and wanted to look at it, and them with their 50 million taps and wanting to get much larger than that, 170 million. All the videos there, all the links to all the materials are there as well. And the reason this wasn't included, as I'm jokingly going to say that, is if we try to establish a graph to incorporate all the rest of us, their portion on the graph would we make really awkward graphs. I'm jokingly saying that they're so much larger than everybody else, but at the same time, the reason didn't include it in the PowerPoint was we do not and will not have supply management or anything of that form. So our best lessons are learned from those who don't have, let's call it the benefit or the situation of supply management. But it does give us a bit of perspective on the scale and size of the Quebec industry. So I thank you very much on behalf of myself and Brody, who prepared the bees and the bees and the wine presentation.
That's excellent, Randall, and way to go. And it was very insightful. And a couple things come to mind: a point and then a question. One of my points is our Quebec colleagues dare to dream big, and bless them. They have a culture of respectfully more entrepreneurship, it seems, than we enjoy in Ontario, and a whole broad spectrum of things. And yes, they get bailed out at times when you think of Bombardier and things like that, but started from humble beginnings. So, they now, a lot of producers, they grudgingly buy into the Quebec model, but a lot of them don't. As you know, there's a lot of unrest about that, about not getting paid for the product. So it's not a perfect system. So but bless them for the rigor that they put through it. I just read the Centre SR report. It was in French, but that doesn't matter. The other day I was making maple butter, and the amount of initiatives on the go are quite profound. It's quite, it's impressive. A lot of funding. My question, with what we heard tonight, what's our thoughts about, or what's our probability of getting an ear with the Ontario government, not to shame them, but to say, here's the scan, here's what's out there on the landscape, here's the art of the possible, and can we talk about some type of model that'll work to help us grow and develop the maple industry in Ontario? Any thoughts, Randall, on or Frank, in your discussions? I haven't been, into government because I'm not that I'm not supposed to, but that's not my role anymore. Any insight into where we are with that?
Well, you realize this whole strategic planning process actually started in December of 2020.
Yeah, I got it. Yeah.
When went in, and the first meeting was with the Deputy Minister of Agriculture.
Yeah.
And he was the one that got all his ADMs and his directors, et cetera, lined up for a summit, a meeting with us to see how they could help. And then now it was the receptive ear to say, well, you've done your analysis, you've done your thinking, you got your background information, now come back. And so that's what we will do with the strategic plan. They also realized that it took quite a while. It would take quite a while to get the input and do it properly, because you could have written something, but if people hadn't contributed to it, it's not going to make much sense. They wouldn't want to do something. One of the ideas that we've already floated, which is because OMSPA has been sitting on the webinars up until the writ was dropped, and they haven't been on any of these webinars since.
Right.
And they won't be because the cabinet won't be announced until the end of June. Is that they were on the applied research and training webinar, and they had also been interviewed. The OMSPA people we often see, but also the Agricultural Research Institute of Ontario, and they were saying, this is what you need to bring to us because we can do something with that. Do not ask us to establish a research program in OMSPA. Do not ask us to establish a big extension program. Ask us to support what you want to do, and is under yourself or a third party. And so, not that they don't want to help, they just don't have the tools that they might have had at one point, or the mechanisms.
So part of it, having been there on the other side of the table, part of it is we need to come with a cogent ask
Yeah.
So what's our ask? And if it doesn't meet the present parameters or doesn't meet the present program structure, it may mean that the government needs to think differently and create something differently. That's how the Quebec model keeps working and working and working, is a new think. And so I'm always leery about talking to people with old think in their mind about new think ideas. And so we come to them with a detailed analysis of where we are, and some great stuff that's been done. It's excellent. And if I was on the other side of the table, I'd say, wow, this is really good. Then what is the ask? Because they're not paid to be creative, right? They're paid to be reactive, and they're paid to try to read the leaves on government's mandate about what is it that is going to put us in good stead with the government and with the client. And can we do that with minimal funding, of course, because they don't have oodles of money, even though they're pissing away a whole bunch of money everywhere. So you understand what's happening in the boardrooms of their thinking about, okay, are these guys credible? Do they have their shit together? Is it realistic where they want to go? Can we fund even basis of where they want to go, or can we support it?
Yeah.
And there's a whole bunch of questions that have to be answered before we're going to get any type of nod. So
realizing that,
and you know that you know.
I know that I made my career off of doing government relations and lobbying and working with government to pass things.
I get it.
And you got to be well positioned. You never forget the people at various levels, but on our team quietly here is the deputy minister and the chief economist for OMSPA. And so what it is that is going to be doable, they'll coach us on that. We just have to know the types of things and how we want to present it to them. And to say, what is the ask at this point? You have some hints, you have some insights to it, but we haven't gone through the process, and we haven't got all our members understanding what this is all about. It's premature to say the ask is A, B, and C. I would suggest there's probably something in the applied research and training, but I'm not going to say that for sure until we've had the opportunity to have our membership more understand this, because the worst thing to happen is say, oh, our membership wants to do this, we want to do that, et cetera, and not actually having confirmed that, because that could slide back on you after you've embarrassed some of the senior people. So it's too early to say what the ask is. I can say there's areas of consideration that shouldn't stretch anybody too far. And then it's a matter of how does that get supported? Now, we've been asked to be more closely aligned with AREO, which is Agricultural Research of Ontario, which basically advises the minister where to spend the research dollars. And often is like just ship it off to University of Guelph and say, here's the type of things you want to do, and University of Guelph, here's the budget for it. But they also know that University of Guelph does not have any maple expertise. And so we then say, well, since that's the case, you need to carve out a bit to support the responsibilities that you have on maple research and an extension, the training. And here's the way to go about it.
I get it. As we work through that, my advice would be that, we if we have a champion or champions, and we obviously, the chief economist is a champion. He's been very supportive. He's awesome. I don't know the deputy. If the deputy's supportive, then we need to reassure them through dialogue of A, where we are, B, we are making progress, C, we do need to consult with our membership and get support for where we are as a basis of information, the lay of the land, if you wish, and then D, what our ask is, and sometimes preliminary discussions with those powers is
Yeah.
helpful in getting them to ruminate and digest
Yeah.
where we are, so that when the day comes where our analysis, our ask, our synthesis is close to where they think, the stars line up.
Well, it's a bit like a lawyer. You never ask a question that you don't know what the answer is to in court.
Fair.
And the thing is that you've got to go back and forth and have the dialogue. Can you say yes to this? Well, not quite. I can say yes to this. So what about if we change that slightly? And see what it is. You don't ask the official question until you know they're able to say yes. And it's basically by checking both sides of the conversation without it being official. And
well, we provide the data.
Oh, I know.
Yeah,
right. We've got a lot of other people here that may want to ask questions. Just
All
put
right.
it this way: I have a long career
I'll
of
check
this stuff. Okay.
I'll check out.
It's David here. I have a question about the third party. You alluded to it a couple times. Can you expand on that a little bit? What you mean by the third party?
Maybe I can answer that, Randall. And
Sure.
I think that's something that I have commented on. And David, as you're well aware, there's two things that the OMSPA or the government of Ontario has to do. One is food safety, and the other one is the actual inspection and auditing of maple syrup throughout the province. They have fallen down on both of these departments, either through retirement or the passing of certain of people in that department, and no one has taken up the torch. I've always been of the nature that we as an organization should have control of those two departments, and we as an organization are probably better suited to know exactly what our members require, not a government agency. We have to follow the rules and regulations that they set out under the Act, but we, I think, can better handle it, and probably with the resources of funds from the government, as in the Beekeepers Association, can probably go further and better with it, and actually give better reports at the end of the year to the government to say, hey, we know what we're doing. We're showing you how we do it. This are the results. We're getting good quality syrup, and we're getting good responsible members to sell to the consumer. So I think that's maybe through the three words that Randall had said before, lobby, lobby, lobby. That's one of the directions that we need to go initially. And once we show that, and with the further data that's being collected through the 10 working groups, we then can expand on different types of funding for different types of work that we can do. Again, crown land, lease land. There's just so much coming out of these 10 working groups that we need to start somewhere, and I think those are two key components that we can start on.
In the Ontario Wine Industry Organization, VQA, Vintners Quality Act, is not part of the association. It is a standalone third-party entity that validates the procedures have been following. It's not a government organization. It's not an organization of the producers. It is a third party. Yep. Now, there's representation from a steering perspective from a number of different producers, a number of different interests, but it's actually a standalone third party that takes on the role of quality assurance under the VQA.
I hope that answers your question, Dave.
Yeah, okay, I have another one here. Or just a comment. So some guys that I've appreciated over the years is Todd Ludy, Paul Bailey, Bev Campbell, Dave Kopesky. Like, we have some real good guys in Ontario here.
Agreed, but they're no longer here. They're retired or have moved on in life, and the government has not replaced them, or we have not replaced them as an association.
Well, yeah, so they're retired as far as government, but they have a lot of good knowledge.
We've certainly been tapping into Paul during this whole process. He has put hours and hours into a couple of the working groups. So
it's also not an issue that people have retired. Those positions have been eliminated.
Hmm,
That's what I just commented on.
yeah, I didn't
And we-
replace.
And
And
we need to take that over. We need to have control of that situation.
Randall, they've been eliminated, but these guys are also like some of us getting up there, and they probably want to enjoy some time. But there, some of these positions are still there, but it's just like anywhere else. There's new people coming in, and I guess we have to play the game.
But in the Ontario situation, all that we had for support specifically at the focus at Maple is down to Jenny's 0.6 of a person here. She does nut trees and some other stuff as well at that point. And again, I like Jenny a lot and she's really keen, but she doesn't have that depth of maple knowledge that some of the predecessors have, and that other people in other jurisdictions do, like Vermont and New York.
My question is, how many on the call tonight have been doing maple for over 25 years?
Well, depends a bit how you count it, but yeah, I have.
Same here.
Huh? I bet you less than half.
Probably a lot. I don't know, but I don't know.
But the thing, David, in Eastern, we rely on one guy that's been doing it for 80.
Yeah, but can we get to David's question? He was asking how many have been doing for 25 years. Is that, where were you heading with that there, David?
Well, it's just like, okay, I guess my comment to that is, you know, the more you do it, how you do it, you get better at it, right? You learn from other people. You learn from people that do research and have put a lot of effort into it. I mean, I look back at the industry has been going since in the 60s. There's a lot of guys that put a lot of guts into this.
For sure. And what does that mean to you, David? What?
Well, it means I guess are we trying to reinvent the wheel? Because
No, I think David, we've taken the 1996 Mustang and we've made it into a 2022 Mustang, and then there's a lot of upgrades in it. So, you know, that's what we're doing here. So we're taking the old Mustang and we're just putting some different parts on it to make it drive better and faster and smoother and less chance of it falling off the road with the old rubber that's on it. So I think you have the right idea. There's a lot of experience here, but there's a lot of experience not here, and there's a lot of experience that wants to come into here and they don't know where to start. So there's a lot of spokes to this big wheel now, a lot more than it was before, and I think once they all get put into that wheel in the next 5 to 10 years, that you're going to see a far smoother riding vehicle than the one that's around today.
Yeah, let's just put it this way. And those other maple jurisdictions, you also have experienced producers who reach out to help others.
Yeah.
But in many of them, they also have a group of other people that are in the association or are in government departments or universities that also can support. So we're shy of, we're not shy of good producers who can help other ones. We're shy of that third party support, those people who aren't in the industry, those people that whether the researchers or the government types or whatever.
Extension.
We don't have the resources to work with other places do.
And Randall, if you look at that third party, probably we can refer to the Acer Center, which is an awesome section out on the Quebec side that does all of the stuff. If we could aim for something like that, that'd be great. I kind of also, the other comment, Randall, that I liked, I'm stunned about the Beekeepers, the same kind of thing, 7 people. And I was actually a very good presentation tonight, Randall, thumbs up. But the thing is, I love the org chart that you had for them. If you're looking for quick wins, I really love that org chart, especially for the issues management and the communication section. Some nice ideas how we could move in from that org chart. If we don't have money now or anything, I'm seeing some quick wins right there about how we could maybe reorg a little bit
Now-
according to that chart.
Jules, let's appreciate this is a scan. It's not, and if there's anything sort of obviously stuck out, I might have bolded it a bit. This is not a solutions document.
No, that's okay. But I really
next-
like that. And
Next
it's like-
week, the focus is going to be on financial sustainability and effectiveness of OMSPA, which comes out of some of it out of this presentation and some of it out of all the other working groups.
Mhm.
And you know, I think I highlighted is that we have all sorts of people belonging to boards at the local level, at the provincial level, massively in excess of any other organization, whether they're Ontario, grapes or beekeepers or any of the other organizations in the maple industry. So we probably need to look at that. And but those are the type of things that you probably want to discuss next week. You're going to get me again one last time.
Yeah, and just a reminder that we're going on Wednesday night next week
Yeah.
instead of Thursday night.
And John, I think there might have been a few questions in the chat there. Can you take a quick peek at them? I know I had one, I think, on the beekeepers.
Yeah, you asked how much funding, you asked how much funding does AMAFRA give to the wine growers?
Yeah, because one of your slides, Randall, had that AMAFRA funded the one of those groups.
Well,
So-
what else? Yeah, well, they OMAFRA, let me see, the wine growers, they would not reveal what they got from where. But
Okay.
also we knew from history that when they got their VQA going, there was support from the Consumers Affairs. It wasn't from OMAFRA, but to get that type of thing going, the VQA. And so there's been investments from government bodies at various times because they knew that it was part of the overall picture to turn something into an economic development generator.
Jules asked too, how do the beekeepers deal with unregistered beekeepers?
Do you want me to elaborate, Randall?
Well, they are registered in a sense because they
Or
all
non-member, I guess is what you're asking.
But they're
Probably.
non-members.
Yeah.
Well, it's a
I-
voluntary organization. They know who the folks are, but they can't make them join. In our case, we don't even know who the folks are.
Well, we get to hear about like the retro thing right now. I'm getting to hear about some producers now. Hey, we're Jules session. I'll join OMSPA. That's why I'm thinking, like the beekeepers. Most of them will be buying bees and stuff in the springtime for their colony. Is this how they keep track of their? Because I know about 10 here that I am almost sure are not registered with that association. That's
No.
why I was curious, how do they keep track? Because it seems like
Because
going
it's
to
not,
church.
it's not the association that tracks them down. It's another thing, which it's all about the bee importation and the disease control and this type of thing. So anyway, they know that they only represent 50% of all the beekeepers, even though they represent the vast majority of all the honey produced. And so we don't even know how many producers of maple there are, but we know how many members we have. They at least have a better handle on the number of all producers in Ontario than we do.
Yeah, because legally, Jules, you have to register if you're keeping bees.
I
with
know
the
I saw
government- with the
that.
government,
That's why.
Yeah, so no.
And it's probably done through the bee sellers and this type of thing. I mean, they're much more regulated than we are. Anyways,
I'm quite-
if you want to learn more about bees, talk to Dan and Tracy Sagan. They're into both
Okay.
businesses. As are some of the others, I believe. Tom Moore is as well. Is it Tom? Stephen Moore.
Stephen
Yeah,
Moore.
yeah.
Yeah.
No, but good comparison, Randall, tonight. I love the Beekeeper Association structure. I think it's very well structured. The other one was another good comparison about a little bit, I don't know, say it more liberated, having this association, this and that. That was a very good comparison. The fact that we may not want to go in the same wine style association. There's too many people talking to the Jenny person of the world, and it's confusion. Very good
And
comparison.
we're pushing 2 hours there tonight. So anybody else have any questions? And otherwise, I think we're going to call it night. Randall, it's been a fantastic program you put together between you and Brody, and lots of good information. Any other final questions? Hearing
Alrighty.
none, it's up to you.
So we'll see everyone next Wednesday at 7:30.
You'll put a couple more emails out, John, for that.
I will, yeah.
Myself included.
Yeah.
Yeah, we sort of got into the habit of Thursday night, so the last one is on Wednesday.
Yeah.
Why don't you just leave it Thursday and I'll drive Toronto, pick up your son and bring him up to your place.
No, I want to see him. I want to be there.
Oh, okay. All right. Okay. All right. We'll see you all next week. Take care. Work safe and stay healthy. Bye now.
Okay. Good night, everyone.
Bye. Bye.
Good night.
Thanks,
everyone.
Randall.
Thank you.